Morning, everyone. I want to thank you and welcome you today to our webinar as a part of our Sustainable Development 2021 Summit, sponsored by the FAO. We're looking to have an exciting webinar today as we kick off our week of activities, our celebration, and our discussions on the topic accordingly. Today's session promises to be one of the very groundbreaking seminars and webinars, better yet, that outlines the different approaches that the OECS Commission is taking. And the title of our webinar today is Building Resilient Food System in the OECS and Barbados. And again, it's part of our SDM Summit 2021. We've got an exciting panelist today made up of experts from across the region that will be here to provide us with the necessary insights, the necessary expertise that is critical as we aim to deal with the issues that are at hand. I'm getting a little technical difficulties here. Oh no, my computer's freezed. Okay, sorry about that. As best as technology is, it keeps giving us challenges, but I'm back on. Can everybody hear me now? Fellow panelists, can you hear me?
Quite clear.
Okay, great. And forgive me accordingly. I think the computer has decided that today is the day that it will give challenges. As I was saying, we have some exciting speakers here today, and I will list accordingly as we go through. But without further ado, if this computer would stop freezing, I will invite our first panelist, that's Dr. Renata Clark, to open with statement. Dr. Clark has been in charge of the Rome office of the FAO for the quality and food safety section for a number of years. And she has just recently joined us within the region as the head of the Caribbean office for the FAO. Dr. Clark has many years of experience in agriculture. She's a welcome breath of fresh air for us here in the region. She has been pioneering the work of the FAO as it relates to rural and agricultural development, and certainly having to do with our food systems. Dr. Clark, I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you, Sean. As Sean outlined, we'd like to keep this lively, and I'm keeping my opening very short and to the point, so we can hear lots of interaction from the audience later. So I'm pleased on the eve of the UN Food System Summit. I am very pleased to welcome all to this webinar. Perhaps the one good thing about the COVID pandemic is that it has given us a sense of urgency about our food supplies, and it's forced us to question some of our assumptions. You know, that invisible mechanism behind the supply of food that would somehow mysteriously always work. So these assumptions, as comfortable as they are, should actually have been questioned a long time ago. While we were sleeping, our food import bills skyrocketed. Our dietary quality deteriorated. The social and economic cost of diet-related NCDs are crushing most of the Caribbean countries. The price of a healthy diet in the Caribbean is among the highest in the world. Our natural resources have become degraded and our agricultural productivity is low. Rates of poverty are highest among our farmers and fishing communities. Business as usual will not get us out of this bind. we need to have a much better understanding of how our food systems are functioning. The food system is live and interconnected. Any action has repercussions elsewhere. So this requires that we share information across sectors. We can no longer sit comfortably in our little silos. We also need to engage much better than we have been with the public. Optimizing our food systems will require whole of society approaches. We need to seek out and enable strategic partnerships that can really help us to reach our goals. The collaboration among the EU, CRAD, and FAO to work with countries around the world to conduct food systems assessments has been provoked by the widely recognized need to change course in the management of our food systems. Such assessments have been carried out in several Caribbean countries, including Barbados and the OECS member states. The assessments should mark the beginning of a new commitment to building inclusive, equitable, and sustainable food systems in the region. And with this, I look forward to hearing the presentations and the discussions this morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You would have heard clearly the issues raised by Dr. Clark, and we need to look at that clearly. And as we go on with this presentation, I would provide you with some details and some statistics that will support what Dr. Clark has just presenting. So I am Govind C Prasad. I'll quickly give you a brief context of food systems in the region. The whole food system concept, previous to this, we used to look at food in silos by itself, just our plate, that what we eat. But today, the food system concept, looking at food security, nutrition, and health. We also looking at decent livelihoods and jobs, and the generation of inclusive wealth. We also looking at equity and territorial balance. And we also looking at preservation of ecosystems and natural resources, and that impact how climate change is impacting on our food system. So the food system approach is a much larger, wider, and broader approach, and that we're looking at. So we also note that the food systems are at risk when we look at our as Dr. Clark said, we fell asleep. We might be unable to feed a growing population in a nutritious manner and nutrition as a healthy manner without impacting our environment. We cannot provide decent livelihoods for all, because decent livelihood is tied to income. Income buys food. There's persistent socioeconomic imbalances and territorial inequities. Between villages, you have poverty and malnutrition. There's a contribution to negative effect of climate change and environmental degradation taking place. And when we look at all this, the UN came in just in time. We look at it, and there's need for transformation. So what is the purpose of food system assessment? It's to support the transition into more sustainable food systems, to identify specific constraints. We gather in evidence and data and knowledge in the process, and we're looking at specific entry points for innovative policy and an investment solution. And our approach to the food system is now a holistic approach where we look at the complete system, and I will show you that in some more details. So if you look at our situation in the Caribbean, in the OECS, for example, the workforce employed in agriculture ranges between 7 and 40%. And that is significant. That is a significant impact. There's a declining and low level of agricultural contribution to GDP. So if your employment is so important, why is it our GDP contribution is getting smaller and smaller? That is an area for us to look at. Then we also know that you have 25 up to 29% of the population under the poverty line, in Dominica, for example. Unemployment ranges from 11% to 23%. And there's an increase in food demand accompanied by changing dietary preferences. People eating different food may not be nutritious food. There's a prevalence of malnutrition and NCDs in our society. There's low level of food diversification in the food system. Food production, we notice, is moving increasingly to marginal lands, and food systems related policies. We need to recognize climate change. We in the region, we've seen one or two hurricanes every year. Now it's also volcano, and these things are impacting our food system. If we look at the characteristics also, we look at there's a low export share. Our export share in agriculture is becoming quite small. And you could, if you look at the data, you could compare it with imports. 268 million compared to 32,000 tons compared to 268,000 tons of food being imported. So we have issues to deal with. When you look at the food system, again, there's a high concentration of production of certain commodities, vegetables and fruit. But when you go into vegetable and fruit, you see is largely dasheen and bananas. So again, there's need to look at the food system. There's a declining trend over time with export-oriented commodities. St. Lucia is still doing quite well, but slipped below all the others today. St. Vincent is grappling with it, but in totality, there's a declining trend. Two countries are largely involved in dominate the export of goods. That's St. Lucia and St. Vincent. So what about the other OECS? What is happening there? The OECS we also see is unable to transition to new market opportunities. We're still holding on to bananas also, although there might be it might be on the horizon. For example, the big market for chicken, we import in a whole lot of chicken, but we're not transitioning into that as what Barbados did here, for example. The world want more avocados, but we're not producing. We also know that the offshore fishery is underexploited in the region, except for Guyana and Suriname. The fishery in the region is highly underexploited, and foreign importers are finding tapping on our doors for more fish, but they cannot get more seafood. Barbados, we note high imports of processed foods and agro-based products. It's very high. It's in some cases it's increasing. But Barbados is the largest importer in the that OECS Barbados area. But we also know that there might be nothing wrong with imports because you're adding value to your tourism product and we're making money with it. So we do not need to look at import through one economic lens, for example. Cause for concern, low diversification in our diets. We see that in the OECS, we import $20 million of sweetened flavored beverage, what we know as sweet drink or pop, as we call it. And then you have breads and cheese, right? So there's a cause for concern that are we consuming the wrong thing? If you look at Barbados, for example, it's also importing an average of 11 million US in sweetened flavored beverages. We also note if you look at the Eat Lancet diet recommendation, we have a high consumption of red meat, higher than what it should be, and very high consumption of chicken. St. Lucia, for example, very high consumption of red meat and chicken. Antigua is within range with the consumption of dairy products. St. Vincent is cause for concern. So again, our food system, we have to look at all these in totality. The other thing is that there's a limited range of products and a narrow range of supplying country. If we look at the data, we see that it's largely the USA and Trinidad and Tobago supplying food for us. And this is, you could talk about this in terms of a monopoly situation, a narrow supply. And then when we tend to import, we import foods that are low on nutrients and higher calories and fats and sweeteners and sodium and all that. Look at the data showing obesity in females very high, increasing at a rate of 5% every decade. in the region, we reach up to the world average in terms of obesity. It's a major cause for concern. The adult female in the population average about 33%, and with that obesity issue. The males are doing a little better, but they are also going up towards the global average. So we have to intervene. Anemia has been declining, but there's still a high amount of anemia in the population. Estimated at 24% in Barbados, in OECS, and 22% in Barbados. So it's still very high. Boy, when you look at this, the non-communicable diseases, diabetes, we are above the world average in terms of diabetes, the prevalence of diabetes. All countries in the OECS and Barbados exceed the global average. It's a cause for concern. And we know quite well, we may not have diagnosed all. The other thing is that the festival foods, if you look at the festivals in the region, we have quite a lot of festivals, which is good. It offers a good market for our food system and the foods that we produce. And we may think about looking at this more to expand our tourism product and expand our markets. But there's also cause for concern, because if you look at our food system, we have to prescribe and subscribe for the future. And is our present marketing production model able to feed us as we go ahead? And maybe it's time we start to think about how do we modernize our food system in the region, and think about, this is where the future is. This is where other countries have reached, growing melangine on the roofs, for example, of greenhouses. We're still trying to grow it on the ground and get it functional. Melangine here, watermelon on watermelon tree, pak choy and all these things in fertigation system, right? Automated fertilizer irrigation application. We need to move ahead of the game and get our food system going again. Over to you, Sean. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. C Prasad. I remember the first time 10 years ago when I encountered a study that you had done. I was in Jamaica at the time, and it was about production. And it's the first time I understood in deep detail the meaning of the using the data. Look at the data, as you said. And it's interesting that you would have put this forward, because you have given us in the OECS to really look at our import bill. What does it look like? And based on the presentation, it is showing us that what we are seeing is not encouraging. It also says to us, what is our food system looking at? What is our food system looking at? What are the market opportunities? How do we transform our food systems? What is the direction that we're going? And I think it leads directly and nicely into our next presenter. Looking at the NCD challenge which exists. And it's no coincidence that we're having this summit now, when we're having at the UN the World Food Systems Dialogue that is happening. And this is something that we have to look at as a region in the OECS and how it is that we can tackle it. I take the opportunity now to introduce our next speaker. And this is a very exciting young lady. I encountered her 2 years ago in Barbados, and I didn't want the session to end. And Marsha Hutton, she has been the executive director for the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, and is the only regional health alliance which is for 100 NCD focus. It deals with civil society organization. She's responsible for providing strategic oversight and management across the various programming areas that encompasses civil society capacity building, alcohol policy, control, food and health policy, and also looking at the voices of young people as it relates to NCD. And even more critical and important, promoting governance in NCD prevention and control, including managing conflicts of interest, and how it is as a whole of government approach that looks at the multi-sectoral approach to tackling NCD. Marsha, over to you.
Hi, Sean. Thank you for that introduction. So I prepared some responses to some questions that I was given, and I'm wondering if I should go ahead and respond to those at the moment. I mean, just to say very quickly, I was very impressed with Dr. C Prasad's presentation. One thing that struck me for sure was the data on the importation of sugar sweetened beverages. And we know from our work that that's one of the primary areas that we target in terms of policies, in terms of regulating the types of foods that are consumed, especially when we know that the #1 greatest risk factor for NCDs is unhealthy diets, and unhealthy diets driven by the consumption of ultra processed foods, of which a large portion of those are sugar sweetened beverages. So our focus at the Healthy Caribbean Coalition around this umbrella of unhealthy diets has really been, how can we influence the food environment? What are the types of policies that we can advocate for that will ensure that individuals within Caribbean communities have a right to access nutritious food, and that the food environments are supportive of healthy eating rather than, as Dr. Clark described, supportive of unhealthy eating. You know, where the healthy choice is the easier choice. It's not the most expensive choice. Those are a few comments. I don't know if you want to wait till the question and answer session for me to go into more detail, or if you'd like me to chat a bit more about any other specific areas.
I think you could give us a little bit more, because I think you have piqued our interest. You know, and
Sure.
forgive me, I'm biased, because it's always a pleasure listening to you and the points that you put across. I'm certain I speak for the rest of the audience out there in the virtual world, certainly on Facebook, YouTube, and persons have logged into the session directly. I mean, you have piqued our interest, so certainly.
Sure, no problem, Sean. So one of the areas that I was asked to talk about was the power of civil society and grassroots organizations in contributing to reshaping food systems. And as I said earlier, the focus that we've had at the HCC is really working in collaboration with partners across the region to build awareness around the types of policies that we really need to push our governments to implement. And these aren't policies that are new. These are WHO recommended evidence-based policies, which have been endorsed and recommended by our heads of government. I mean, you'll see it in communiques year after year. So we're talking about fiscal policies, which increase the costs of unhealthy foods and decrease the cost of healthy foods. So SSB taxation, for example, as we have in Barbados and Dominica and Bermuda. We're talking about school regulations, so policies which regulate the availability and accessibility and marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages in school settings, in and around. So we're talking about the vendors too. And we've seen the success of these policies in countries like Trinidad. Recently in Jamaica, they instituted restrictions, as you would know, around the availability of sugar sweetened beverages in schools. And then we're also talking about policies which make it easier for consumers to make the right choice when they go into supermarkets, to understand which foods are healthy foods. Now, we know when we go into the supermarket to select foods, right now, all of our products are subject to marketing by the manufacturers. There's no regulation. The labels, sometimes they aren't even in English. We have claims around this is heart healthy, this is not heart healthy, and this is high in fiber, this is low in sugar, and there's no standardization. And the consumers really have to turn to the back and read a nutrient facts panel, which is, you know, they need to be a nutritionist to read that. So one of the areas we've been focusing on is promoting something called octagonal fronted package warning labels. And these are labels which have been introduced in a few Latin American countries with great success. They are recommended by the WHO, by PAHO, and by CARFA. And so they've been, this is a cutting edge policy which we know works because the evidence is emerging, which has shown that not only do they change consumer preferences and direct them towards healthier foods by identifying foods that are high in sugars, high in fats, high in sodiums, but they also have been shown through modeling studies to potentially reduce the costs associated with obesity. And we talked earlier, Dr. Clark mentioned the crushing costs, the economic and social costs of obesity and NCDs. So, you know, to move on a little bit more, CARICOM is currently, or has been over the past 3 years, deliberating around a regional standard on front of package warning labeling, front of package labeling. And in this standard are these octagonal warning labels and a PAHO nutrient profile to define which products will receive these labels. There has been intense consultation, quite a bit of tension between those public health advocates and industry actors who are keen not to have the labels and would like a menu of labels. But I think what I'd like to focus on is how civil society, working with partners such as the FAO, PAHO, UNICEF, the OECS Commission, Ministries of Health, over 300 public health professionals and academics, almost 50 institutions and civil society organizations around the region have mobilized in support of this public health measure. And as a result, one of the things that was implemented was a campaign called Now More Than Ever, Better Labels, Better Choices, Better Health. And this was a campaign which resulted in over 23 million impressions on social media over the course of May and April. Tremendous support across the region, probably one of the most, we would say, impactful public health, civil society-led campaigns that we've seen, and leading to support at the highest levels of some of the most kind of prominent policymakers. We had the head of PAHO, head of the OECS Commission, head of UNICEF, really, stating their support, and then supported by grassroots organizations. An example of that would have been the Heart Foundation of Jamaica. So while we had this regional campaign happening, we had CSOs really playing an active role in monitoring the process. You mentioned that idea of governance and governance of public health, monitoring the process to ensure that there was transparency and accountability at every step of the way. So that's a flavor of the work that we're doing to try and influence the food system from the food environment perspective. We've been trying to now shift some of our work into looking at the food supply, really building on what we saw from Dr. C Prasad and the types of foods that are coming into the region and how we can influence the quality of those foods. But for the moment, the bulk of our work is really focused on the food environment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. As I've said before, it is always a pleasure listening to you because the level of partnership, the level of engagement that the HEC has always displayed is something for the region to really look at, replicate, to look at this. How it is that we can work across sector, multidiscipline entities and so on. Yes, and I think I think as I'm saying now, it segues beautifully into our next speaker, who is Lynn Fefer. I always pronounce his name bad. Don't laugh at me, guys. But he is one of the persons that I work directly with in my professional capacity. And the type of leadership that I've seen with him, I've experienced with him in the OECS and development of the agricultural sector. And there's no doubt that his training with a BS in agribusiness management and an MSc in agricultural economics has shaped this. And his direct responsibility has to do with regional agricultural trade and policy development. And how it is that the OECS from the agriculture and agribusiness lens influence transportation, farm management, food system, logistics, and financing strategies. And I think the work that he's doing now is timely, and the experience that he comes with to contribute to this topic that we're now discussing in this webinar. So Lynch, I put forward to you now.
Thank you very much, Sean. Am I being heard?
Yes, you are. Lima Charlie, loud and clear.
Let me thank the audience for the opportunity to participate in this very timely discussion. And if I may refer to Dr. C Prasad's presentation, which is a great presentation made on the food system. And I might note that and I agree with him wholeheartedly that the food system for the region has to be transformed. And in that regard, transformation of the food system has to be done from a regional approach. And if you note, if we consider the OECS and the population of the OECS and Barbados, our population is somewhere just over 750,000 people. And in this regard, we need to take a regional approach, and to do so in all business areas, we need to look at the ease of doing business in the region, because our agro entrepreneurs, our farmers are business people. And to transport, so we need to look at certain key areas, certain key constraints in the region, such as transportation. We need to look at efficient interregional trade in the transportation system. It may even mean that we may have to look at both passengers and goods transportation to make it feasible, but it has to be done. We need to look at the freer movement of goods, the system of the administrative system, including sanitary and phytosanitary issues with regards to the movement of commodities within the region. We need to make it simpler and more administratively simple. And in that regard, we need to look at manufacturing. We may want to look at different manufacturing stages where a product may be transformed or partially transformed in one country and completed in another country, and the completed product shipped around the region. And I might add that the Commission is leading in this regard by looking at policies and strategies and initiatives that are going to facilitate the transformation of the regional food system and the transformation of the environment to do business in the region. I must also add that our agro-entrepreneur, the environment which we operate in, our agro-entrepreneurs, our business people are relatively unique, and in that we are subject to significant risk. I mean, we in the region where we're prone to hurricanes, drought, climate change, and a focus on understanding need to be enshrined in our movement, in our philosophies, our strategies moving forward as we craft the future for the agriculture sector for the next 10 years. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Lynch. I think you have really gotten to the point, hit the nail on the head where it is that the crux of the matter is. And I think this is the first question that I will put out to the panelists, and I'll ask everyone where possible to take that. And it's a question that hits to the heart. It is said that people eat what they can afford. And as a result of that, that is where we'll always be. Is it the view of the panelists that is this true? And two, can we do anything to overcome this? Because it is bread and butter issues that really affect our diets and our food supply and what it is that we consume. People eat what they can afford. And until, to touch on what Lynch spoke about, until we're able to fix these economic challenges or these facets that deal with logistics, transportation, manufacturing, production, people will eat what they can afford, which is cheap imported food. What are the panelists' thoughts on this?
Sean, probably if I start, I may say that people eat what is in style and what is fashionable rather than what is imported, because a lot of time the highly processed foods and the foods that are in style are much more expensive than so maybe it's more a matter of style and fashion. Over.
Marsha?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the comments I made earlier about what are the types of policies we can implement. And I'm speaking again on the food environment end, to make it easier for people to afford healthy foods. You know, where a soft drink is not $1 and a juice is $2. What are those types of fiscal policies we can implement to disincentivize the purchase of unhealthy products and incentivize the purchase of healthy products? I mean, and in tandem with that, what are the types of programs that we can implement at the community level at scale? And I'm thinking of the HCC OECS Backyard Gardening Initiative, where we worked with civil society organizations in 5 countries to target families living with diabetes and help them to start up their own backyard gardens, or where there was no backyard space, kitchen gardens. how can we learn lessons from those initiatives and scale them, and also create public demand for them? You know, growing your own food, the cost is very minimal if you can get, you know, if you can get those things right, and you can get the support of the right actors, and you have a community behind you working with you. So I think that there are some big policy actions we need to take to address those cost issues, and then there's some community actions we can take, again, working in partnership. And I think those, as you said earlier, Sean, very much need many partners on board to work.
Dr. Clark, I have to put you on the spot.
Tell me, Sean, put me on the spot. Yeah, I see that Sean has frozen. But I wonder if he was going to put me on the spot with one of the questions that I've just seen in the Q&A, which is if FAO has a model food system that it recommends for countries to apply, and the answer to that is no. And that in the exercise that Dr. C Prasad just presented was the exercise of really assessing and consulting across sectors, across different interests and areas. What is the current situation? What are the aspirations? Where are the data? So we can really understand contexts, understand ambitions, and make sure that we optimize. But this is a very individual, country by country process. So we do stand by certain principles, that participativeness, that use of data and evidence-based decision-making. In relation to this, you know, there are certain practices in relation to the circular economy, in relation to, yes, in relation, hi there, Sean, welcome back. I'm answering I'm answering what I think was going to be your question in relation to the model food system. Okay, so there are many principles that can guide good practice and many tools. You know, I was in part of a meeting just yesterday where a suite of tools where countries can estimate, you know, the carbon impact of certain practices and policies was being discussed. So that in some countries in the Caribbean, and I'm thinking of Guyana and Suriname, where, you know, a low carbon future is what is an important ambition. We provide tools for this. So there's no model. There are just principles to be observed and a lot of hard work in making it happen.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. I pose another question, and I think this is important. Is it the view of the OECS Commission, the OECS member states, that for our food systems to survive, for our food system to prosper, we have to digitalize? Do we have to introduce more technology into our food systems? I put it to the panelists for us to discuss. And I'll start with Lynch in this round.
Thank you, Sean. In my short career, one of the issues I've noticed with regard to appropriate technology in our space is that a lot of it many times are inappropriate. And I would agree that we need to introduce appropriate technology that fits the particular situation and that is scalable, that is something that is not expensive. In other words, I don't think we can lift a $500,000 greenhouse out of the northern hemisphere and plant it somewhere in the OECS, not considering the impact of a hurricane on it, and the fact that the investment amount will be too great, and also the fact that the production volume that you require, the market cannot handle it. So the technology has to be appropriate and has to fit the realities of the OECS, and Barbados. However, we need to look at introducing appropriate technology within the space to increase our production efficiency and also to take advantage of certain niche market opportunities. Thank you.
Maybe Sean, I could give you two examples of what we need in the region when we speak about digitization. For example, in Kenya, people don't go to market anymore for that face-to-face transaction. Everything is done over the cell phone. The payment system is over the cell phone. So if we're talking about intra-regional movement of foods, for example, there's no reason why the hucksters and higglers still need to move on the boats. You could send your goods and receive your payment electronically. So it means to say that we need to upgrade our whole banking system in the region as part of our food system as we go forward. The other thing is that market information and intelligence hardly exists. And this is something that we need to work on some more and put some more focus. Work has started in it, but we really need much more if we're talking about a modern food system and our ability to feed ourselves. Over.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I move to the next two questions which I'll take from our online audience, I want to take the opportunity to express on behalf certainly of the OECS Commission our gratitude to the FAO who have sponsored this webinar for today. And it says a lot about the partnership and the collaboration that keeps going between the FAO throughout the region. And I just want to mention and just acknowledge the FAO accordingly. We have a question here from our online audience. And it says, according to nutrition literature, it is extremely difficult to get people to change dietary behavior. What successes have we seen in this regard? That's the first question we're taking from our online audience. And I think, Marsha, I think you're the one who is best suited to give us some answers to that.
Yeah, I think just acknowledging that it is very difficult to change dietary behaviors. And as a result, this is why we always need to go back to changing the environment. Right now, our food environments are set up for people to eat unhealthy foods. They are set up, they are obesogenic is what we call them. They are, we did some work with UNICEF where we follow the life of a child in a day, going to school, getting on the van, someone selling a bag juice. On the way to school, you're picking up some fast food. Outside the school, vendors are selling candy. You're being targeted when you go to the supermarket with your parent. So the environments are set up to support behaviors which are unhealthy behaviors. We need policies which reshape those environments so that the triggers which cause us to engage in unhealthy dietary practices are now switched. And we need to stop putting the onus on individuals to make these hard choices in environments that are set up for failure. So I think we have to go back to, we must put pressure on policymakers to implement policies which reduce the costs of healthy foods, which remove marketing, predatory marketing to children. Children should not be targeted to purchase unhealthy foods. It's unethical and it violates the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And we need to make it easier for consumers to correctly, easily, and quickly identify those foods which we know are health harming foods. I mean, this is simple, basic stuff. These policies have been, they're evidence-based, the data is out there, it's clear. And so we need to start implementing those policies which make it easier for the average person, regardless of age or literacy, to make healthy choices. If not, it's going to be an ongoing battle. Now, we can't expect people to make healthy choices in the environments that we're currently operating in.
Thank you, thank you. I have a follow-up to Dr. C Prasad's not presentation, but previous intervention. And the question that's coming from our online audience is one that says, are there any plans to develop any technology to support farm-to-table delivery service in St. Lucia? And I dare say we could expand that to the OECS where it doesn't exist. I'm not sure which one of our panelists would take that on. As to the merits are same and the possibility and the viability are same. And I think this is a more important given the environment that the globe is now existing in.
I would say yes, and I would say that even during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, this came to the forefront as a new business model. So what we find is that people didn't want to be in clusters. So this whole new innovation of mobile food markets emerge, and I think we need platforms to support it. So it means that we need a database of all those buyers and sellers. So at the reach of our cell phone, we could get our buyers and sellers moving without that physical interventions of governments and large market structures. So I think this is where the future is, and I would say that the pandemic kicked off this business model, and it's something to build on. Over.
Thank you. One of the things, certainly as an agriculturalist, I've been following and I've been doing extensive research on, and I see it being reflected here from our online audience and the question being asked. And that is the issue of the circular economy. And I think it was Dr. Clark who mentioned the circular economy, I think. But the question is, further to the low carbon development mentioned, are there any plans to incorporate greater renewable energy technologies within the entire food systems in the OECS? I think I would ask Lynch if you could take on that, because that's a real question.
I agree, Sean. But we must also look at the concept of circular agriculture and to make it more efficient. For example, the output of a pig pen is in addition to meat, but also the liquid waste. But the system we need to design right now is that that needs to be the input of a fertilizer system or a biogas system, so we can generate revenue from that, and also at the same time manage the impact on the environment. And I'm saying with our small economies, our small land space, and the impact of climate change, the cost of our production systems, that is the only way we can move forward. So therefore, we need to incorporate the concept of sustainability into our agricultural enterprise at all levels. So we're not only going to make the enterprise more efficient, but more economically viable. And therefore, I agree with you.
Dr. Clark?
Thank you, Sean. Okay, in relation to, let me go a little bit broader from your question, because of course I'm not dictating the policy in the Caribbean, but I can tell you what FAO is trying to do in relation to supporting initiatives that are relevant to the circular economy. One of the issues will be discussed tomorrow in one of the SDM webinars, and that's on using insect rearing, using waste to create a source of feed for animals. This is part of the circular economy, taking waste, upgrading its value and its protein quality to create value within the food chain. So reducing waste, but also at the same time, increasing self-sufficiency on a commodity for which we are highly import dependent. There are other areas that we are discussing or working with the UE and other institutions in relation to water treatment, water reuse, the issue of water reuse and recycling for agriculture. This again, we are increasing water scarcity, but we're not using our water resources with high efficiency. So these are two areas of focus for us at the moment. But the possibilities abound, limited only by our imaginations.
I tend to agree. I remember watching an intervention where, what should we say, stale bread was sent to a beer making factory where it was fermented, and what was left was used to make bread again, and the process continued. I found that fascinating. I found that something that we really should look at. And I think it segues into another question, which is here. And certainly in front of us, certainly for the immediate future, we'll never have a question as webinar that doesn't look at the effect of COVID on our food system. The question that is put here, certainly from our online audience, is how has the pandemic helped to shed light on some of the weaknesses in our food system in the Eastern Caribbean? And what opportunities are, if any, are there to capitalize on the new awareness and transformation of our food systems? I think I'll throw that out to Marsha to answer for us.
Thanks, Sean. I think emerging out of the pandemic, I think we have a greater public awareness around the vulnerabilities that having an NCD or obesity are linked with COVID. So if you got COVID and you have NCD or obesity, you're likely to have severe COVID infection. So there is a greater public awareness about what these class of diseases are and the vulnerabilities that are associated with them. And then attached to that is what are the things that the steps we need to take to either avert those or to manage those illnesses. And so I think we need to capitalize on the increased interest in healthy diets, in having fresh fruits and vegetables, in backyard gardening, in ordering your vegetables so that you can ensure that you're sustaining and feeding your immune system. Another observation, we at HCC, we track industry activity, the food and beverage industry activity. And we noticed over the course of the pandemic, there was a definite uptick in donations of unhealthy products, ultra-processed foods by the private sector. And we also noticed an increase in marketing of these types of foods towards children. And I think we also need to use this opportunity to take a closer look at how we manage food donations in times emergency settings. How do we ensure that the types of foods that are donated are healthy, nutritious foods and foods that don't increase vulnerability of the populations being targeted? And also linked to that is, stepping back a bit in terms of food governance. How do we start to think about putting in place as measures to safeguard healthy food policy making from interests which are counter or which conflict with healthy diets? And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you much. Dr. Clark, there's an online question for you. Does the FAO have a proposed model food system which the various Caribbean countries can explore and implement?
Well, when you dropped off, Sean, that's the question I answered. So now maybe you can answer me. You can ask me the question you intended to ask.
No, that's all right. But I want to go back a little bit to something that was mentioned before. And I've seen it's building steam online as to the discussion. And it is about food packaging. And it's centered around this particular question that says, food packaging, especially plastics and microplastics, which are derived from the oil industry mostly, are showing up negatively as it relates to affecting our ecosystem, our sea life, land, and human life. I won't mention that past that is said there, but how do we as a region move away from this reliance on plastic-based tools? How do we now start really from a food systems approach, having a more sustainable look at same? And I think, Marsha, I think that is you, and it has something to do with the labeling standards and probably so on. So I'll ask you to look at it and see whether or not this is a question that we can take on as the OECS, or how it is that we should approach it further.
So Sean, I'm afraid, did you say Maisha? Yep, it was for me.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think this is a bit out of my expertise. Certainly when we talk about labeling, we're talking about the labelings that are on the food packages. But I think we have recognized that the linkage between food systems and climate change and the environment, and the importance of thinking about how we sustainably package food so that we don't do harm to the planet. But in terms of the actual how we begin to make that shift and the types of materials that we need to use, I would defer to another panelist to answer that.
Are there any takers?
I'll take it. I think we also ought to look at plastics in terms of making foods available, because by packaging, we also add life, the food, lengthen the life of the food and make it more available for persons across. So there's a negative side, but it's very important that we engage in some amount of packaging and extension of shelf life for food. So we need to look at all sides of the coin, as we say, but manage our waste at the same time. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you much. I take the opportunity to just say to our audience that there's an online poll that's going on. I'm asking everyone who is online, who's a part of our participants, if you could just go online and fill out this quick, very short poll that rates the seminar accordingly. We'll ask you to just do that quickly. The final question that I'll put forward, and it's coming again from our online audience. Is there a greater need for us as the OECS, as partners in our food systems, to put out positive ads that demonstrate the benefits and encourage members of the public, certainly OECS, to eat locally grown food and healthier food? Is there a need for us to have ads that counter what we perceive as negative marketing from the larger companies that put out foods that aren't of the best nutritional value?
Can I contribute? Yes, Sean, I agree. And I also believe in addition to that, there needs to be some policy action at the level of the country systems. The school feeding systems programs need to lead by example. For example, I believe it's my firm belief that at the primary school level, fruits need to be introduced within the school feeding program to at least influence the habits of the young children, and to move on from there. Also, so therefore, we need to have a strong policy response in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you much, Lynch. We're approaching the end. So I'm gonna ask each panelist to just give me 30 seconds of wrap up as to the points that they'd want to leave with our audience here today. And I'll start with Dr. Clark and Dr. C Prasad, Maisha, and then Lynch. So I'll ask each panelist to give me 30 seconds as to the key points that they'd want to leave the audience to leave here with today.
We need to get out of our slumber. We need to think creatively about each of us. Each of us has a role in making the food system sustainable, resilient, and healthy. That's my message.
I think we need to look at the outbreak of COVID in a meat processing plant in the US. Threatened the protein supply of the Caribbean. It rocked the Caribbean. And we need to look at these again at our food system and see how to put in things in place, mitigation systems in place. Thank you.
So my message is that our food systems need to be people-centered at the core, where people's health is put at the priority, and that drives all of the decision-making around the food supply and the food environment. Let's make sure our food systems are people-centered.
I agree. We need to think outside the box. We need to look at our food system, our various food production system, and think of them sustainably and seek to encourage the linkages between the various sectors in our countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panelists. As we close, I want to say firstly, thank you for those who participated in the online poll. Thank you very much. I want to say a special thank you to the team from the OECS. This is a well put together summit. This was a well planned and executed webinar. And also to invite participants to log on to our next session, which will have somewhat of an opening ceremony with the keynote address being given as it relates to the summit. And I think it's interesting and it will be game changing for us. And it will give us the level of comfort, the food for thought that we need as a region, as we rethink our food systems and our approach the same. Thank you very much. Please log in and register if you haven't already to the additional webinars that we'll be having throughout the week, and contribute, participate, let your voices be heard. This is our region. Let us make it work for us and definitely our food system. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.